Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into a really disturbing story. It's one that takes us inside a family that seemed, well, completely normal from the outside.
Yeah, it's unsettling.
Yeah.
Our source material for this is a pretty detailed account of what happened, starting with just one single phone call, a call expressing concern.
Right. And our goal here is really to unpack the events laid out in that source, look at the people involved, and try to understand what the account suggests about how something like this, so unexpected, could even happen.
It's definitely a story that makes you pause, makes you think about how much we really know about what people are going through,
Sure.
even those closest to us.
Absolutely. So the source lays out this narrative starting right at that initial moment of worry. Okay, so let's get into the details provided. The story really kicks off in March 2020.
That's right. And it didn't start, with police finding something. It began when a university teacher called the police. They were worried about a student.
And what triggered that call? What did the teacher hear?
Well, the teacher was on the phone talking to someone at the student's home, and they heard these really alarming sounds in the background.
Sounds like
Screams. Distinctly multiple screams, the source says.
Yeah.
And then maybe 5 or 6 really loud banging or crashing sounds. Just awful to hear over the phone.
Oh, absolutely terrifying. So naturally, the teacher feared for the student's safety.
Exactly. They asked the police, please go do a welfare check on the student, make sure she's okay, right away.
Okay, so police head to this home in Akron, Ohio. Can you paint a picture of Akron for us based on the source?
Sure. It mentions Akron's a city, maybe around 190,000 people. It does give a crime stat, like 1 in 23 people might be victims of crime there. Mm-hmm. But it also notes it's considered safer than a lot of the surrounding cities. So, fairly typical American city is the impression.
And this house belonged to the Powell family. The mother, Brenda Powell, she's sort of central to this early part.
Yeah, Brenda. She was 50 years old in 2020, graduated from the University of Akron herself, and her career. Quite something.
What does she do?
She was a pediatric hematology and oncology specialist, so working with kids who had cancer and blood disorders at Akron Children's Hospital. She'd been doing that since she was 28.
Wow, that's incredibly demanding work. How was she seen by others?
The source really emphasizes this. Parents of her patients said she was just incredibly caring, spoke so kindly, always attentive, and her colleagues, they called her lovely, dedicated, someone who just really genuinely loved kids and her job.
Sounds like a deeply compassionate person, really respected.
Totally. A pillar of care, you could say. Mm-hmm. So the family was Brenda, her husband Steve Powell, and their only child, Sidney Powell. Sidney was 20 back in 2020.
And what does the source tell us about Sidney leading up to this? Her high school years, for instance. She went to St. Vincent St. Mary High School there in Akron.
Right. And she seemed like the model student, really. Described as quiet, but incredibly studious, always getting high grades, top test scores, often right at the top of her class.
Smart kid.
Very. But not just academics, she was athletic too, played on the girls' soccer team.
And lacrosse as well, right? The source mentioned that.
Yeah, apparently very skilled at lacrosse. The source even throws in a little note about it being, fast-paced, needing quick reflexes. Just adds to this picture of Sidney being really capable, successful.
So academically gifted, athletic, maybe a bit quiet, but clearly driven. And Steve and Brenda, her parents.
Immensely proud. The source says they were just so proud of everything she'd achieved.
It paints this picture of a really close, high-achieving family, doesn't it?
It does. And as Sidney got ready for college, the source mentions they were really tight-knit, talked about everything. Brenda especially, working with kids, she was super involved in Sidney's future plans.
And they decided on Mount Union University.
Yeah. Described as a small but high-quality private university, about 45 minutes away, so not too far. Seemed like a good fit. Sidney liked less crowded places, close to home. Plus, friends were going there, too.
Makes sense. But the really big thing, the detail that becomes so key later, was the scholarship she won.
The presidential scholarship, yes.
That sounds incredibly prestigious.
It is. The source really highlights this, only given to maybe 160 students across the whole country each year. And it wasn't just like a bit of help. It covered everything.
Everything.
Full tuition, room, and board. For all 4 years. It was huge. Massive validation, of all our hard work.
So fall 2018, Sidney starts university, full ride, everything looking great.
Seems that way. And the source notes the family stayed close. They even used that Life 360 app, the location sharing thing.
Oh, yeah, people use that to track family members.
Right. Real-time location, notifications when people arrive or leave places. Plus, the university had a parent portal for grades and stuff.
But Steve and Brenda didn't really use it much at first.
No, not actively. They trusted Sidney. I mean, look at her track record, right? And that huge scholarship, they figured she had it handled.
Okay. But then things started to change a bit around 2019.
Yeah, the source indicates a shift. Sidney started talking less about school, about her life there. She might mention a class was hard, but wouldn't really elaborate or ask for help.
And her parents just thought,
well, initially, they figured it was just her growing up, becoming more independent, learning to sort things out herself. It seems pretty natural, right, for a young adult?
yeah, that makes sense.
Except, looking back, the source suggests it was more than that. Sidney came home for breaks in 2019, had a part-time job nannying for a local kids' baseball team. But still, pretty quiet about school.
And then January 2020 rolls around, she goes back to Mount Union, but things weren't what her parents thought they were.
Not at all. This is where the secret really digs in, and you can feel the pressure building in the narrative.
What was the actual situation? What had happened?
The source reveals that the semester before, Sidney had failed 3 courses.
3. Wow.
Yeah, and that wasn't just like a bad grade. It meant she'd lost her official student status. And crucially, she lost the presidential scholarship.
Oh no, the whole thing.
The whole thing. And she wasn't allowed to live in the dorms anymore either.
A complete academic collapse, basically. And she didn't tell her parents.
Kept it totally secret. The source says her advisor even asked if she'd talked to them, and she lied. Said yes, she had.
So what did she do? Where did she go?
Instead of coming clean, she started staying in hotels near the campus, just living this lie, pretending everything was normal.
Wow. How long could that last? Did her parents notice anything?
Well, yeah, the cracks started showing. Steve noticed Sidney was asking for a lot more money than usual, which was weird, right? With this scholarship supposed to cover almost everything.
She must have been paying for those hotels.
Must have been. And Brenda sensed something, too. Noticed Sidney seemed distant, and she'd left that Life 360 app, stopped sharing her location.
Breaking that family habit.
Exactly. Brenda texted her, kind of gently urging her, focus on your grades. Remember the scholarship, how important it is.
And Sidney?
Texted back saying her grades were fine. Just kept the lie going.
So Steve was getting suspicious about the money, the distance.
Right. So he decided to check that university parent portal himself. But when he tried to log in, the password had been changed.
Sidney must have changed it.
The source implies that, yeah, to stop him seeing her grades. So Steve called her, asked about the portal.
And she lied again.
Yep. Told him the system was just down for maintenance. And Steve, well, he still trusted her. He accepted it. You could just see this web tightening around her.
And the parents are getting closer, but they still don't know the full picture. Until March 3rd, 2020, the day it all came out.
Yeah, the source pinpoints that day. The university advisor, the dean actually, decided to call Steve directly, bypass Sidney altogether.
The university must have realized something was really wrong if Sidney was telling them she'd talked to her parents, but clearly hadn't.
Exactly. So the dean calls Steve, tells him the truth about Sidney's academic status. She couldn't register, her student status was suspended.
How did Steve react?
Shocked. Totally shocked, the source says. He asked, when did this happen? And the university staff were surprised he didn't know, because Sidney had told them she'd discussed it with him.
That must have been a devastating phone call for Steve.
Absolutely. The university gave him access to the portal then. He saw everything. The failed classes, the suspension, the whole lie out in the open. Sidney was told, come home, now. We need to talk.
So Steve goes home, knowing the truth, to confront Sidney. How did that conversation go?
He told her, I know. He knew about her status. But even then, according to the source, Sidney initially tried to downplay it, denied the full extent.
Still trying to hide.
Yeah, saying it wasn't quite true. She was still going to some classes, friends saw her, admitted maybe some minor problems that just needed time to fix. Shows how hard it was for her to face it.
And how did Steve respond to that, despite the lies?
The source portrays him as being pretty empathetic, actually. He suggested maybe she take the summer off, just take a break from school.
But Sidney didn't want that.
No, she resisted that idea. Apparently expressed feeling like a failure, especially compared to her friends who were doing well. You really sense that intense pressure she felt.
That fear of failure seems huge for her. Did the conversation end okay?
It seemed to, yeah. The source suggests that despite how difficult it was, Sidney actually appeared relieved afterwards, like a weight was lifted, having finally talked about it with her dad.
And Brenda wasn't there yet.
No. Brenda had also been told by the university she was on her way home. Steve, maybe feeling like they'd broken through, decided to... Well, he made a decision.
What did he do?
He trusted Brenda. Believed she was closest to Sidney, the best person to help figure out the next steps. So he decided to leave the house, finish up some work he had to do. He told Sidney, Mom will be home soon to talk.
He left, thinking the worst was over.
Yeah, thinking the secret was out, now they could deal with it. He even texted Brenda later to see how the talk was going, but got no reply.
So Brenda gets home. What happened then?
She arrived, and around 12:36 p.m., she called the university back. Talked to the dean and Michelle again. Not angry, but wanting to discuss options for Sidney. Like, could she retake courses? Was there a way forward?
She was trying to fix it.
Exactly. And this is the moment. While Brenda is on that call with the dean and Michelle, they hear those sounds. The sounds of violence starting on Brenda's end.
The screams, the banging.
Yes, multiple screams. Then those 5 or 6 loud bangs or crashes.
Yeah.
Then a heavy thud, like something big falling. The staff immediately asked, Brenda, are you okay?
And then, silence.
The line went dead, cut off. They were obviously horrified. Called back immediately. First time, no answer. Second time, someone picked up.
Ooh.
They asked cautiously, is this Brenda? And the voice said yes, claimed to be fine.
But it wasn't Brenda's voice.
No. Dane and Michelle knew instantly. It was Sidney. The source says their hearts just sank. They knew something awful had just happened. The call ended again.
So they called the police immediately.
Right away. Called Akron police, requested that welfare check, told them everything they'd heard. The screams, the bangs, the weird call with Sidney pretending to be her mom.
So the police arrived, alerted by the university staff about a potential attack. What did they find?
When they got there, the source says the first look suggested a break-in. There was shattered glass, things looked kind of tossed around, ransacked.
But that wasn't the real story.
No. Inside, they found Sidney. She had some minor scrapes, bruises, but Brenda was found severely injured, covered in blood, massive wounds.
What kind of wounds?
Blunt force trauma, multiple impacts, consistent with those banging sounds, and numerous stab wounds to her neck. The source mentions around 23 stab wounds.
Oh my God. And what did Sidney tell the police at first?
She claimed a burglar broke in, attacked them both, robbed them, injured them.
But the police saw problems with that story.
Big problems. That broken glass, it looked like it was broken from the inside, like it was staged after the fight to look like a break-in. The mess also looks staged.
And the weapons.
Found right there in the house. A pan consistent with the blunt force injuries.
Wow.
And a steak knife consistent with the stab wounds. Just normal kitchen items, things Brenda would have used for cooking.
Everyday things used in such a horrific way.
Yeah. And the source notes Sidney's behavior changed after that initial story. She just clammed up, sat there crying, wouldn't talk anymore.
So with the university call, the stage scene, no sign of anyone else, the police concluded Sidney was the suspect.
Pretty quickly, yeah. All the evidence pointed towards her.
And Steve, when did he find out?
He was notified then about the attack, his wife's death, his daughter's likely involvement. He rushed home just devastated. The source mentions he felt overwhelming guilt for leaving earlier.
I can't even imagine. The autopsy confirmed the brutality.
It did. Confirmed Brenda died from both the blunt force trauma, those 5 or 6 hits, and the sharp force injuries, those 23 or so stab wounds to the neck. And tragically, defensive wounds on her hands, she fought back.
She tried to defend herself, and the investigation
Found nothing else. No forced entry, no DNA from anyone else. It all lined up. The sounds heard on the phone, the weapons found, the injuries, the lack of other evidence, it pointed squarely at Sidney.
So she was charged, and it went to trial. What was that like? The source describes the scene.
Heartbreaking, particularly for Steve. He was there, but visibly broken. Seemed disconnected sometimes. The judge even had to prompt him. Just profoundly affected. And the source says he kept blaming himself for leaving that day.
And Sidney's demeanor during the trial.
She often cried, covered her ears, especially when the graphic details came out, or even when her past successes were mentioned, like she couldn't face it. The university staff testified, of course, about that horrifying phone call.
What was the defense strategy?
They argued she had a mental breakdown, maybe schizophrenia, a catatonic state, claimed she had no memory of the attack itself.
Her memory was just gone for that period.
That's what she claimed. Remembering talking to her mom going to her room, Sidney going to the basement. The next thing she remembers is being in the hospital, injured.
Did psychiatric evaluations support that?
No. Sources clear on this. 3 experts evaluated her. All 3 concluded she wasn't genuinely mentally ill in the way the defense claimed. They concluded she was malingering.
Faking it.
Essentially, yes. Faking illness to avoid consequences. That was the conclusion of all 3 experts.
So the trial concluded. The verdict came on September 20th, 2023.
Sidney Powell was found guilty. Guilty of proposed murder, felony assault, and tampering with evidence.
And her sentence? She was 23 by then.
A minimum of 15 years in prison. She'll be eligible to apply for parole when she's 38. If she doesn't get parole then or later, she could spend the rest of her life in prison.
Did she say anything at the sentencing? Especially to her father.
The source says she was asked, but she just remained silent. Looked sad, shook her head, but no words.
Just silence. It really captures the devastation left behind, doesn't it? For Strip losing everything. For everyone who knew them.
An absolutely tragic end. The source then tries to explore the why. Since Sidney never explained herself, what theories does it discuss?
One main theory revolves around that intense pressure, right? The idea that after being so successful, getting that huge scholarship, failing felt like the absolute end of the world for her. She couldn't face it.
Yeah, the pressure she felt, maybe from her parents, maybe just from herself. The source connects it to things like Brenda's text about grades, the tracking app. Not saying they were overly strict, but hypothesizing that those things, combined with Sidney's personality and the secret, could have created this unbearable stress.
Right, it's presented as a possible factor in the dynamic. What other theories?
Another idea is some kind of acute stress reaction, maybe even a brief psychotic break, triggered right there in that moment when the secret was fully exposed during the conversation with her mother. A sudden, impulsive, horrific loss of control, an attempt to just escape the situation.
But these are just theories, attempts to make sense of it.
Exactly. The source is careful to state that we don't know the true motivation. Only Sidney does.
And that unknown is chilling. This whole story, the source uses it to reflect on broader things, doesn't it? Like the pressures kids face today.
Definitely. The pressure on students, the importance of mental health support in schools, in universities, having places to turn before things reach a crisis.
And within families, too. The importance of open communication, being able to talk about struggles, about failure, without feeling crushed by expectations.
Yeah. It's an extreme, terrible case, obviously. But the source presents it as a kind of grim reminder. People can be carrying immense struggles inside, pressures that aren't always visible. And sometimes those pressures become too much.
We've walked through this incredibly sad story based on the source material, from what looked like a normal family dealing with a tough situation to just unimaginable tragedy that leaves you with so many hard questions.
Questions about expectations, about secrets, about what happens when someone feels completely trapped.
It really does make you think, how do the pressures we all face or the secrets we might keep affect how we react when things go wrong? And what difference can real understanding, real open communication make in preventing people from reaching that point of desperation?
Heavy questions indeed. Ones that linger long after hearing the details.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive today.